Daniel Jordan Smith is the head of the anthropology department at Brown University. He graduated from Harvard with a degree in sociology in 1983 and then switched to a master's degree in public health from Johns Hopkins 6 years later. A decade after that, he completed his PhD in anthropology at Emory University and settled into the anthropology department at Brown, where he has become a leading authority on Nigerian society and development in particular. His 2008 book, A Culture of Corruption, dealing with Nigerian politics, won the Margaret Mead Award in Anthropology. This 2004 article was part of Smith's Nigerian research, which he started with his dissertation work, supported by numerous fellowships in the 1990s. It gives us a look at a country still at an early stage of the demographic transition, but the importance of the article also stems from its qualitative anthropological approach. Instead of tables of numbers, Smith's study relies on first-person field interviews with a limited number of men and women and reports on their opinions and intentions in detail.
Traveled to Nigeria to conduct research in public health. The cultural context of the country, so different from the American society in which he had spent his early life, quickly captured Daniel Smith's interest. He spent about half of the next 20 years living in Nigeria on repeated visits, and the cultural contrasts he encountered probably explain why he shifted his career from public health to anthropology. Nigeria is a large country in geographic area. If it were superimposed on the United States, it would cover the entire territory between Chicago, New York, and Atlanta. This land area is roughly the same as the total of France and Italy combined. Nigeria also has the largest population of any country in Africa, over 190 million as of 2017 and still counting. This population is equal to the total of the European populations of Germany and France and Italy combined. Since Nigeria adds the equivalent of Germany's population within the land area of France and Italy, this means that Nigeria is considerably more crowded with people than are those European countries. The demographic transition has barely begun in Nigeria, and its already large and dense population continues to grow at a rate of 2.6% per year, near the maximum rate hypothesized by Malthus in the absence of any kind of checks to growth. This article is not about population statistics, however. Smith wants to explore the personal lives and attitudes of Nigerian people to find out how they are making their actual decisions about whether or not to have children, and in particular about how many children they want to have. Thus, he does not present any graphs or tables based on statistical analysis of vital statistics or census counts. He presents quotes and descriptions of conversations with individual Nigerians. But there is still a systematic structure to the analysis based on where he found the people to interview. Since he wants to capture the traditional attitudes that people have before they encounter any of the changes associated with the demographic transition, he starts with people living in a traditional village. The area he chooses, in the southeast part of the country near the Atlantic coast, is home to the smallest of the three major ethnic groups in Nigeria, the Igbo people. From villages in the community known as Ubakala, Smith and his research team selected 20 married men and 20 married women to interview. They conducted lengthy interviews in which they were able to discuss many aspects of people's lives, including, of course, their attitudes about children. They then also got information from these respondents about relatives and other people who had moved away from the village to go and live in urban areas. Interestingly, the urban area that he selected to follow up the rural-urban migrants from Ubakala was not any nearby city in the southeastern Igbo region of the country, but the oldest city in Nigeria, dating back to long before Europeans began to colonize Africa. The city of Kano is far up in the northern part of the country, in a very different climate zone. In addition, it is in the heart of the geographic region dominated by the largest ethnic group in Nigeria, the Hausa people. In this northern part of the country, Islam has become the dominant religion, while the coastal regions dominated by Igbos and the Yoruba people were strongly influenced by Dutch and then British Christian missionary activity. So people leaving Ubakala to go and live in Kano were not only making just about the longest journey possible while still staying within Nigeria, they also were leaving their cultural homeland and going to live among people who differed from themselves both ethnically and religiously. When you add these contrasts to the contrast between rural and urban communities, every imaginable source of possible changes in attitudes and lifestyle seemed to be present. Potential to find new ways of thinking about family and childbearing would certainly seem to be present among the migrants that Smith then sought out in the second part of his interviewing project. In particular, all of these changes in social environment should create a near-perfect test of the ideas that had been around for nearly a quarter of a century by the time Smith embarked on this work. The ideas of Jack Caldwell from Australian National University about changes in wealth flows, and especially the idea that in one cultural context it might be perfectly rational to have large families with many children, while in another cultural context it becomes equally rational to have smaller families and to restrict the number of children born. Ubakala village life should provide an example of a place where we find large family rationality, while Kano City should provide at least the beginnings of a strain toward reasons for having smaller families. With these community contrasts in place to test this theoretical perspective on determinants of family size, Smith and his colleagues get to work and collect their interview results. But Smith is not really a demographer, and his interest in population growth and other demographic topics is actually peripheral to his main research focus. He is best known for his book about Nigerian society called A Culture of Corruption. That is not a book about population, but about politics, economics, and social relationships. His longer-term focus on these topics works its way into the study of family size preferences through a key idea that he sums up by a phrase that even appears in the title of the article, having people. This phrase has a double meaning in this context. On the one hand, having people could refer quite literally to the reproductive process of birth itself, of having children. But on the other hand, and this is the main sense in which Smith uses the phrase, having people refers to what social scientists usually talk about as social networks. Specifically, Smith is referring to networks that involve ties of mutual obligation between consanguine kin, that is, blood relatives, such as parents, children, uncles, cousins, grandparents, and so on. These ties of mutual obligation form one of the oldest cultural structures in the world, and one of the strongest and most widespread. Kin-based patronage is the lifeblood, so to speak, of the patriarchal system. The details of this system can take on diverse different forms and structures in different parts of the world, but the underlying principle is always the same. It can be summed up in terms of your attitudes towards your relatives. To put it bluntly, a person invested in a system of kin-based patronage will do anything for someone within the family, but also feels no hesitation or remorse about doing anything to someone beyond the bounds of the family. It is the ultimate expression of the general principle of in-group versus out-group. You owe loyalty, consideration, and even sacrifice to your relatives, but everyone who is not a relative is a potential target to be taken advantage of in the interests of benefiting your relatives on the inside of your group. The extreme expression of this mentality would be the mafia. Moral obligations, honesty, reciprocity, fair dealing, and honor only apply to your interactions with family members. When this in-group, out-group mentality is combined with an assumption that hierarchical relations are natural and desirable, and both principles are focused on kinship ties rooted in reproductive relationships, the result is patriarchy. It is patriarchy when we see it embodied in the classic Confucian hierarchies of age, sex, and generation in East Asian cultures. Younger brothers obey older brothers. Women obey men. Children obey parents. It is still patriarchy when we find similar logic in Nigeria, half a world away. This is the deeper cultural background that produces the result that Caldwell noticed, wealth flowing from children to parents. So for Smith, having people mainly means having a strong, extensive network of available relatives who can give you special consideration at every turn in life and create better life chances for you in every way. The more general concept of social capital is mainly concentrated in this kin-based patronage system in these networks of family ties. Beyond such ties, not much else matters in such a society. This is why in his book called A Culture of Corruption, Smith is able to point out that what looks to us like unfair favoritism towards relatives, that is, corruption, might be understood from another cultural point of view as the actual essence of moral activity in life. In fact, it might not be too much to suggest that one of the most revolutionary cultural changes that has been in progress for several centuries now is the gradual destruction of this much older system of kin-based patronage in favor of entirely new criteria for defining equitable and ethical relationships among people. This replacement goes to the heart of what we mean by the term modernization. Is eager to test Caldwell's suggestion that in certain cultural settings, high fertility and large numbers of children might be entirely rational. He expects to find this attitude dominating village life in the Ubakala community, where higher fertility should mean that people gain a larger kin network, and that this larger network of relatives then gives them a collective advantage in the competition for power and resources in life. Of course, any kin-based patronage system has two sides, or perhaps we should say works in both directions. On the one hand, if you have a lot of relatives, then those relatives are in themselves a source of power and advantage for you. If you need help with some kind of construction project, or if you need a multitude of hands for agricultural labor, or if you need votes for a local election, or possibly even a lot of strong arms in the event of more direct confrontations that may even develop into physical conflict, those relatives of yours will come in handy. Lots of relatives can translate into direct social, economic, and political power. But this is only true if these relatives all feel a strong sense of kin-based obligation towards one another, including towards you. It requires that relatives must be willing to sacrifice time, talent, and treasure for each other when called upon. On the other hand, once you have availed yourself of the advantages of a large and powerful extended kinship network and achieved a situation of some power and privilege, you have a special obligation to pay back all that loyalty and support. You must use every advantage you have gained to do special favors for your relatives and help them in every way possible. If you become the rector of a university, you must be sure that all your nieces and nephews gain admission to the school. If you become the Minister of Defense, you must be sure that all your cousins get commissions and promotions as officers. If you rise high in a nationalized company that deals with an international oil company for drilling rights off the coast of your country, you must be sure that all the bonuses and bribes and other financial benefits that flow your way then move along to benefit as many of your relatives as possible. This system still functions as the basic fabric of business life in many parts of the world. There is nothing peculiarly Nigerian about it. Whenever a strong man like Muammar Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein rises to the top and controls a whole country, the village where all his relatives live becomes an oasis of privilege, wealth, and power, and all his relatives rise up with him in the government. For our purposes, this general picture of kin-based patronage systems comes into sharp focus when we look at the implications for reproductive behavior. The system is the underlying pattern of life that makes wealth flow upward from children to parents. It is the basis for looking at large families and many children as rational, even mandatory behavior. If you owe your loyalty and support to your relatives, one of the ways you have to express this is by having a lot of children so that the kin group is bigger and stronger. But this raises a serious potential threat to the system, the threat that game theorists call the free rider problem. A free rider is someone who takes advantage of a system without doing his or her fair share to support it. The most obvious example is someone who gets on a streetcar or bus or a train and tries to ride to the next destination without paying any fare to support the transportation system, literally riding for free. But it would also apply to people who expect to get anything for nothing, whether it might be food or housing or medical care or any other social and economic good. In this example of kin-based patronage, it could mean someone who expects to enjoy the benefits of membership in a large and powerful family group without producing any children of his or her own to contribute to its size and strength. All kin-based patronage systems all over the world reserve some of their fiercest fury and scorn for their own members who fail to pull their weight, to live up to their obligations in this way by producing a bumper crop of children. So having many children may be a very rational choice, not only because the children have some direct, obvious economic benefit for you in your own immediate household, but because they represent payment of an obligation that you have to all those other relatives. If you neglect this obligation, the results might be very bad for you later on, even if the children themselves are not all that great an immediate or obvious advantage to you at the moment. Smith expects to see clear evidence of the large family logic expressed in both the attitudes and the childbearing behavior of the people he interviews in villages in the Ubakala community. But what will he find when he makes the long trip up to Kano City in the dry, open plains of northern Nigeria? Will that new urban context somehow alter people's attitudes and behavior? Why and how might urbanization and economic development break down the kin-based patronage system? For this is exactly what Caldwell and many other transition scholars expect to happen. The most general form of the modernization argument for the effects of urbanization and industrialization focus on the simple issue of the scale of operations. It may be possible to run a shop or even a string of shops as a kin-based operation, but it would be absurd to think about operating General Electric or General Mills or General Motors as a family business. At some point, with the expanding scale of industrial production and the expanding size of huge metropolitan areas, people simply must begin to learn to rely on other people besides their own relatives in order to make really large operations successful. The available resources found outside your own kin group become so much larger than the resources that your relatives can provide that the only logical alternative is to start thinking in terms of this bigger picture. And when strangers are forced to interact in this way, they must develop rules and standards for their interactions that do not depend on connections to one or another specific individual person. Relatives who you've known all your life, who treat you in a special way just because you're relatives. When your interaction with each particular person you meet depends on specific knowledge you have about each other as individuals, and you treat each person differently depending on whether they are your relatives or not, and even which relatives they are, we call that attitude and those interactions particularism. When, on the other hand, you must interact frequently with total strangers or people you hardly know at all, you have no special knowledge about them, and you have no special obligations to them any more than you have toward any other strangers. In that less personal context, standardized rules of conduct usually emerge and become institutionalized. These standards cover everything, ranging from making appointments and measuring time in a more regimented way, that is, with clocks and calendars, to settling fixed prices for various goods and services instead of haggling and bartering, to insisting on a written contract enforceable by court legal action instead of relying on a handshake, to recognizing and using money as a standardized medium of exchange. It includes dress codes, handshakes, averting your eyes rather than staring at people as you pass them on the street, crossing at crosswalks, and stopping for red lights. We call all of these uniform standards applied in the same way to everybody universalism. The modernization explanation of the demographic transition suggests that industrial-scale production, distribution, and consumption, and life in huge metropolitan cities inherently forces a shift from particularism to universalism, and that when this happens, it also automatically undercuts and eventually destroys the power of kin-based patronage and extended family groups. Children are no longer as advantageous as they once were, because they are no longer the basis of your own personal life chances. And the larger kin group no longer has either the power or the interest to compel you to produce them for the good of the larger group either. Wealth now flows from parents to children, and so it becomes rational for people to have fewer of those children. This is what Smith supposes that he should find in Kano City, if Caldwell's interpretation of the world is correct. Village communities of Ubakala Smith found that the ideal of large families as components of even larger extended kinship groups was alive and well. The traditional goal was to have about 8 children, and some of the women he interviewed indeed had given birth to 8 children. If you begin having children in your late teens and have a child every couple of years, a total of 8 births could occupy you in a perpetual world of nursing infants and toddlers crawling around your feet until you reach at least age 30, and then you would spend another decade or 2 of your life bringing up all those children, feeding them, washing their clothes, supervising their chores, and making sure that they all got along together. By the time they were all grown up and old enough to begin having children of their own, you would be close to the end of the childbearing ages and starting to think about how much help all of them were going to be to you in your old age. It is true that some of the Ubakala residents interviewed by Smith expressed the thought that Nigeria isn't like it used to be, and that maybe only 5 or 6 children would be possible for some people now. But this kind of opinion usually was expressed with a sense of frustration and disappointment. It really was too bad that some people were no longer able to have the ideal number of 8 or more children. And when you were unable to live up to that ideal, the implication was that down the road, you and your extended kin group would be worse off as a result of this shortfall of children. The idea of children as valuable long-term assets to the family was still very much present, even when people expressed their frustrations about not being able to reach the desired goal. The reasons that people in Ubakala gave for wanting all those children amount to a regular roll call of the explanations offered for high pre-transition fertility in demographic theories. The woman who had given birth to 8 children had lost 2 of them, so the infant mortality threat was part of the justification for large families. People also often cited the fact that children were useful, that they could help out by carrying water, by running other errands, by watching livestock, by caring for younger brothers and sisters, and that eventually they would be a source of security and kindness in old age. And beyond these various dimensions of direct usefulness of children, Smith also frequently heard that one had to have these large numbers of children because all your relatives expected it, even demanded it of you. The extended kinship group was not just a theoretical construct. It was a functioning, organized social entity, definitely present and influential in the personal lives of its members. And the interests of the larger group in seeing its power preserved and enhanced by plenty of children were communicated continually among its members. This large family rationality of 8 or more children formed the traditional cultural background against which Smith gives us much more detail about the results of his interviews with Igbo migrants living in Kano City. The transplanted Igbo migrants living there expressed quite different attitudes about having children. The most common response that Smith heard in conversations suggested that families should aim for at least 4 children. This represents a 50% drop in the ideal number of children that a family should have. Many of the respondents who talked with Smith about these issues did not, in fact, even have 4 children. Some of them had only 2 or 3. So in this respect, the transition to a more modernized urban setting did indeed have exactly the effect the demographic transition theorists would predict. Smith probed deeper in these interviews in Kano, trying to see why people no longer thought of 8 children as a normal ideal. The answers he got also ring true with the development and transition narrative. Chinwe, a 32-year-old mother of 3, said, "My husband and I have agreed to have only 4 children so that we can train them well. It is better to have a few children who are educated than many who are not. That way they can find good jobs." The emphasis on good jobs did not refer in any way to getting a good job through connections with your relatives. The jobs that she was talking about were in the hands of strangers, so that children could not rely on particularistic connections to get them. Instead, children had to succeed in formal schooling and acquire the universalistic marker of educational attainment in order to get these good jobs. Good jobs were essential to long-term success and happiness, and formal schooling was essential to get the good jobs. And formal schooling, of course, was expensive and time-consuming and precluded any productive role for children in the family household. Here we have the classic transition theory explanations for fertility control, summed up very nicely by this urban Nigerian mother. It seems clear that Smith has uncovered direct evidence that parental attitudes are starting to shift, that parents are forced by the new social context around them to begin to consider children as potential economic liabilities rather than just assets. They are experiencing for themselves the beginning of the reversal of wealth flows, seeing their resources being expended for the sake of their children's futures in a world no longer totally controlled by kin-based patronage. But the age-old traditional kin-based patronage system is not giving up without a fight in Nigeria, any more than it did anywhere else during other countries' struggles to pass through the demographic transition. The dominant theme throughout Smith's article stresses the feeling expressed by nearly all of his respondents that they are all facing a tension between the demands of that older traditional system and the new, modern, urban industrial world of universalistic criteria and social networks that have expanded well beyond the old kin group boundaries. What Smith calls the long reach of home people was particularly well expressed by the woman in Kano named Oluchi. In our culture, your marriage and your children are not simply your business, she told him. They are the business of the whole extended family and the whole village. Don't you see how my mother-in-law came all the way here to complain about me? My husband has not said so, but I know he will soon demand another child. So even though couples may see the benefits of fewer children, allowing them to invest more in achievement of universalistic credentials for the ones they do have, they must contend with the fact that their extended kin groups are still very much alive and operational, and that mothers-in-law and other relatives are always out there very interested in whether you are having enough children so that they can count on you as reliable members of the family when they need a favor or some money or a job or other traditional forms of patronage. It can be hard to live a modern life when you are still embedded in a traditional network of consanguine relatives on a daily basis. The Igbo families living in Kano were keenly aware of this tension between the new reality of children as expensive liabilities and the old traditions of kinship obligations and patronage requirements. They found themselves caught in the middle, and the 4 children that they thought seemed about right represent a compromise between the old ideal of 8 or more and a thoroughly modernized goal of perhaps 2 children, or even 1, or even none at all, given their status as expenses rather than resources. One could imagine that Smith's portrait of these Nigerian families, caught in the conflicting currents of modernization and kin-based patronage, might give us a good snapshot of a population on the verge of entering the demographic transition, as it is explained and understood in its classic form. Eventually, we might expect, the forces of modernization, urbanization, and industrialization will win out, and the Nigerian total fertility rate will descend from 6 or 8 children per woman to somewhere around 2 or 3, as has happened in so much of the rest of the world. But Smith is not so sure. In this article, as in his other books and articles on Nigeria, he points out that the traditional kin-based patronage system remains very much strong and alive throughout Nigerian society, even in the biggest and most modern cities. It is still, most of all, a question of who you know, and the people who really count in this regard are still usually your relatives, or at least people from the same village or the same ethnic tribal background as yourself. People are still organizing life in Nigeria according to the particularistic rules of the patron-client system, with kinship still playing a key role. The outside world often tends to judge this ancient system simply as corruption, but its roots go far back in history, not only in Nigeria, but around the globe. And by its own internal logic, these favors and special arrangements are not corruption. They are signs of loyalty and obligation that should be admired as part of a coherent worldview. Will modernization disintegrate kin-based patronage in Nigeria and replace it with contracts, corporations, and millions of individuals who no longer think in terms of special favors for their relatives? Or will Nigeria find a way to defy the forces of modernization and to capture all the scale, wealth, and complexity of modern life within the traditional web of kin-based patronage? It will be interesting to see how the next few decades turn out in the biggest population in Africa.